You're listening to the Stoic Solutions Podcast, practical wisdom for everyday life inspired by the ancient tradition of Stoic philosophy from Greece and Rome. I'm your host, Justin Vacula. Visit my website at stoicsolutionspodcast.com. This is episode 104, Metallica and Stoic Philosophy. I speak with Dr. William Irwin, a returning podcast guest, about his newest book, The Meaning of Metallica, Ride the Lyrics. We talk about themes in Stoic philosophy found in the lyrics of Metallica songs, including the dangers of irrationality and relying on externals for happiness. We also talk about acceptance, humility, depression, self-improvement, and finding fulfillment. William Irwin is a professor of philosophy at King's College in Pennsylvania. He is the author of several books, including The Free Market Existentialist and God is a Question, Not an Answer. In addition, he is the general editor of the Blackwell Philosophy and Pop Culture series. Irwin's most recent book, published in April of 2022, is The Meaning of Metallica. Find more information in the show notes. On with today's episode. All right, thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Justin. I was just thinking before coming on with you how great it is that you're doing this podcast and how important it is that the word gets out there about Stoicism, and thinking back on my own education all the way through to a PhD in philosophy. And I never had a class where the Stoics were discussed or read, probably mentioned in passing, but that's about it. And I regularly teach the Stoics, or at least Epictetus in particular, in my intro class, and just so practical and so important. And when you think of the things that you want people to take away from philosophy, Stoics have to be right up at the top.
All right, great. We'll make up for some of that lost time today for sure. And you're a returning guest on the podcast, so thank you for coming back on. And now you're with another book.
Yeah, well, you're very kind to have me back, Justin. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. So this book is called The Meaning of Metallica, Ride the Lyrics, and I realize many of your listeners and followers are not necessarily Metallica fans, but I think that we have some good conversation that we can have around Metallica, drawing out Stoic themes. And even though the book isn't explicitly formulated around Stoicism or even around philosophy, there are a number of Stoic themes and ideas that come up in the lyrics, and sometimes as examples of what not to do and how not to be, as well as examples of illustrating Stoic ideals.
Absolutely. And even in the Stoic text, there's talk about drama, there's talk about literature, and many things that we can learn lessons from, some things that can be applicable to our daily lives and have some value, as though the Stoics warned about things like the murderous intent of gladiators, for instance, rather than just a competition. We could still find some redeeming value in entertainment and literature and music and so much more.
Yeah, well, that was one thing that I was curious about when you first asked me to come on to discuss this, because your reading of the Stoics is broader and deeper than mine is. As I said, I never even had them in class, and most of my experience in reading, I mean, I've read Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and a little bit of Cicero, but I'm mostly focused on Epictetus, and he has a pretty negative view, at least in my take, on the arts and entertainments as potential inflamers of emotion. And you don't necessarily avoid it, but you don't necessarily go out of your way. And so how do we fit in discussion of a heavy metal band that inflames emotions with the sound of their music and their lyrics? But I'm glad to hear that you think that we can take a look at art in its various forms and appreciate it for what it illustrates. Sometimes illustrating a negative of how not to be, how not to get angry, how not to get upset, along with some of the maybe loftier ideals that are put forward as well.
Sure, and as you talk about in the book, there are some deep philosophical themes in the music. You organize it by chapters, talking about religion, addiction, insanity and confusion, death, war, justice, freedom, emotional isolation, control, and resilience. So we'll talk about some of the topics today. And in the first chapter, or maybe the second, you talk about self-deception being a bad thing, that some religious adherents, for example, can ignore reason in favor of dogma. And this can lead to disasters such as people refusing to take modern medicine and dying when this could have been avoided, especially children.
The book is really focused on Metallica's lyrics, although I talk about the music, the instrumental parts as well, when it sort of reinforces or is important for understanding what's going on lyrically. And the book is organized thematically, as you mentioned. So some fans may come to the book thinking it's just a catalog album by album, but really what goes on is a sort of thematic treatment where I skip across different songs and different parts of Metallica's career to sort of organize it. And the book is intended as something that can read like a conversation akin to what you and I are having, and where we sort of wander from one thought and theme to a next as seems to make sense. So you mentioned the theme of self-deception, which is an important one that comes up in Metallica's discussion of religion, starting with the song Creeping Death, which raises all sorts of potential questions about the way in which there is belief in this really very angry Tony Soprano kind of Old Testament God who is going to kill all these baby Egyptians just to free his chosen people, and into a song called The God That Failed, which is very self-reflective on the writer's part. The lyricist of Metallica, for folks who don't know, is James Hetfield, and he was actually raised as a Christian Scientist, and witnessed some really unfortunate things where people were deceived into thinking that prayer could heal an illness or a disease, and in fact, his own mother died when he was 16 as a result of an untreated illness, and then later in life, his father, who had previously abandoned the family, died of cancer. It's less clear to me if he sought treatment or not, although he was the prime believer in Christian Scientism in the family. And the evidence just speaks for itself. What we have there is a clear case of self-deception. And another important song in the Metallica catalog, Leper Messiah, speaks to the way in which people sort of willingly take on the self-deception that can be needed in some forms of religious belief. And Leper Messiah from 1986's Master of Puppets album largely is speaking to the televangelists who ran rampant on the airwaves back then, and the way in which people so sort of desperate for belief in something that would soothe the pain of and difficulty of life were willing to sort of sheep-like follow some of these people.
Yes, the Stoics warn us about putting too much adulation or thought in one particular ideology or individual, and to really question everything, right? Even Seneca is saying, hey, the words I have now, maybe I'm wrong about something. We can look at the people from the past, but we're not going to just automatically believe that everything they said is correct, that we'll amend ideas, we'll get new information, and try to grow society, ourselves, and much more.
Yeah, that's such an important insight, and so different from what you hear in the sort of muscular faith of so many religions, an admission of fallibility. What I say may not be right. Test it out for yourself, right? The proof is in the pudding. There's a natural overlap there with Buddhism as well, where the Buddha was claiming, don't take my word for any of this, try it out for yourself and see if it works.
Sure, and not only religion, but it could be celebrities, it can be politicians, where some people will try to excuse away any kind of bad behavior, and they'll just have this messiah complex around an individual or an ideology, even though a lot of evidence points contrary to the goodness that they think it is.
Well, that's true, and it's sort of funny when you bring that up, because We see that in fan culture and in its various forms, and I have to be constantly on my guard in writing this book that I'm not sort of deifying James Hetfield and Metallica and making excuses for some songs that are less than up to standard. And Metallica has their share of haters out there as well because of changes that they've made career-wise and sound-wise. And I had one guy tell me that Metallica is a cult. And, they're not a cult band. They're a huge band. But it is true that some people, and I've had to guard against them, this tendency myself, will excuse anything and find a way to like anything, and that I think is contrary to the spirit of Metallica at their best, and certainly contrary to the spirit of Stoicism.
Say like, oh, well, not every album is going to be a 10 out of 10, right? It's really rare to see that for sure. Some people might be, for instance, fans of the earlier music, but not so much the Load and Reload albums, for instance.
Yeah, it's a very funny thing with Metallica, not to get too deep into the weeds here, but in Metallica fandom, and I've spoken to many Metallica fans. The dominant tendency is to like the earlier albums much better, and some people part company very early. But I've found people whose favorite album is their most reviled and least critically acclaimed album, Saint Anger. And there will be people who pick a song off of, a deep cut off of Saint Anger or Reload as their absolute favorite. And, when they say that at first, I think they're just putting me on and trying to get a rise out of me, but they're serious. And some of that does have to do, I think, with exposure. And when you first got into a band or kind of music tends to make a huge emotional impact. And, that's the kind of thing I think the Stoics would tell us to guard against, right? That you can't really be objective about the value of something when it's made an impact on you emotionally, particularly at a particularly sensitive time, whether that's in high school or some point in adolescence, etc.
And speaking of some level of humility, saying that, okay, well, we haven't made all the right decisions, we've made some mistakes. Hetfield talks about his own struggles with addiction. We have the song Master of Puppets, for instance, and it seems to lead us to a conclusion, or at least the message that I got from it, that there's very much danger relying on externals for happiness, whether it be drugs, alcohol, something else.
Yeah, that's right. So in the thread that leads from one chapter to the next, and as our discussion is sort of following now, the theme of self-deception is the theme that sort of connects the issue of religion and the issue of addiction, which is the next chapter, right? And it goes from following a leper messiah to following the God that failed to obeying a master. And the song Master of Puppets, off of what is generally regarded or widely regarded as their greatest album, the 1986 album Master of Puppets, is really a song about addiction. And Hetfield wrote it when he was a full-blown alcoholic, although sort of in denial about it, as many are at various stages in addiction. But it's a song that deals in drug addiction. The line "Chop your breakfast on a mirror" resonate with anybody who's ever dabbled in cocaine, and needlework the way for intravenous drug use. And it's easy to look at the person who is worse off than you when it comes to being reliant on something external, right? And whether that external reliance is on consumer goods or on Facebook likes or Instagram followers or on a drug, be it cocaine, heroin, alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, or whatever it is that you put into your system. that's a really, what would you say? That's a tightrope that you walk when you do that. You take a chance, right? You can get the benefits from it, but ultimately it ends up being, and the song nicely reveals this, as I discuss and analyze in the book, that the master of puppets is not the powder in the bag or the liquid in the bottle or anything like that, but your own reliance that has become so warped and dependent and elevated to the level of addiction really has you enslaved, right? And really part of the goal of being a Stoic is to be free, to be liberated, and to not be enslaved to the desires and the externals that so many people find themselves enamored of and enslaved to.
Right, it's the issue of overdoing it with the drugs. As some of the Stoics will talk about, okay, you can indulge in food, you can indulge in wine, but just don't overdo it. And that's the problem that comes up in the song, is it gets to such a level that you're unable to back away. You're having the extreme withdrawal. There are all these issues coming about. You don't have that personal freedom anymore.
Yeah, right. So the slave becomes the master in that sense, right? That at first you're using the drug, but the drug ends up, in that sense, using you. You've warped yourself so that you're not getting the better of the deal. Winston Churchill had some kind of great line about his relationship with alcohol, where he said, "I've taken more from alcohol than alcohol has taken from me," and that might be so in Winston Churchill's case, but it's a dangerous game that we play when we abuse and overuse something, where it ends up taking more from us than we take from it.
Yes, but there is some hope in that you can recover, but it's going to take a lot of time and work to do that in many cases. And the Stoics talk about that too. Epictetus reflects on his issues with anger, and he says, well, I didn't expect a recovery overnight, but I noticed, I wasn't as angry last week. For instance, there are certain degrees to it. So noting that improvement and giving yourself some time to recover and taking a serious effort at it is certainly something we can try for, rather than just totally giving up.
No, that's absolutely right. It's not about giving up altogether. Yeah, whether the issue is one of substance addiction or just problems with anger, which is no less serious of a problem. It's not that you're doomed necessarily. I think that there is an important element of Stoicism and acceptance that's at the heart of recovery from substance abuse, and it's at the heart of recovery from anything that has mastered us, whether it be reliance on Facebook likes or overindulgence in anger.
To move on to another related topic, you talk about depression, and I'll try to avoid the word starting with S and ending in E, maybe taking one's life for the YouTube censors out there. This idea that people can get, that nothing can get better. You talk about people are often hyper-focused in the present, and they're only looking at examples of the negatives, but not the good things that are going. This is some of the themes in Metallica's music as well.
But sure, taking your own life certainly is an awful temptation that one can find oneself faced with as a result of, well, whatever life circumstances may occur. And the Metallica song Fade to Black really very much engages with that issue and shows the thought process of the person who is in deep despair and has lost the sense of self. And it is one of those examples that I think a Stoic can and should approve of, where it really delivers a catharsis, so that listening to the song doesn't leave the listener wanting to take his or her own life, but really having engaged with the awfulness of the sense of despair that might lead to it, instead feeling like as long as I can summon some hope to go on, a recovery, as we were just talking about, is possible. Yeah, really, it turns out to be a message of hope rather than a message of despair.
And the Stoics note that there are some cases like extreme illness, disease, where someone might want to end it, but that's a pretty rare situation in modern times, I would think, compared to some people. It's like, oh, well, my lover left me, so therefore life is not worth living. Like that's an extreme jump in things, right?
And actually, there are a couple of Metallica songs that come to mind and that I discuss in the book, where ending one's own life, or at least the wish to end one's own life, is rational, as opposed to the song Fade to Black, where it is, it's a classic case of clinical depression, which is no laughing matter and not trivial and does take lives, but for most people, there is the possibility of some recovery. I'm thinking here of the song One, which is a song that a lot of people will know, even if they're not Metallica fans. It was their first video, and for a lot of people, it was their introduction to Metallica, where the scenario that's depicted is out of a movie called Johnny Got His Gun, where it's about World War One, but the movie is really an implicit critique of the Vietnam War from early 1970s, the film, and the person who is depicted, Johnny, I believe, in the film, unnamed as a character in the song One, is without the ability to see, hear, or anything, and is believed by the doctors to be basically in a persistent vegetative state, but he's just existing, and tries to signal ultimately through his bodily movements in some sort of Morse code to unplug him and let him die. And you can see how in a situation like that, right, and this is perhaps the kind of thing that some of the Stoics would see as a rational choice, that this life is not worth living. Another very strange scenario that's envisioned in another Metallica song, a song called Trapped Under Ice off their classic album Ride the Lightning, is about a person frozen in a cryonic state who actually then regains consciousness but is still frozen in the cryonic state and is unable to communicate to anybody in the outside world to thaw him out. I sort of almost laugh at that. It's a tragic state to imagine. But it's kind of like, you could imagine almost like a Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's no way you're going to let me put me in a cryonic state, because what if I come through and this is what happens, right? But that too would be a case where one could sort of wish to die. But in both of those situations, the ability to end one's life is deprived because of the physical circumstances. That's sort of the awful, almost Twilight Zone irony of those situations.
Yes, the Stoics talk too about exile, of maybe you get expelled from your country, and especially in ancient times, you would just be on some barren island. And is that really a life that we want? How are we going to cope with that? And that was a more common occurrence back then. And some people were, maybe I can try to find some positives and use this as a time to reflect. Maybe there's something good that can come out of it. That's a message within Stoicism too, that, okay, well, maybe we think that things are bad now, but maybe not all hope is lost. There might be some examples where, of course, it is, but not always.
Yeah, right. So that's a great example, exile, in the sense that from a modern perspective, it seems like, well, maybe that wouldn't even be so bad. People drive me crazy. Send me away. I'd be glad for that. and from the time and place in which it's considered such a terrible punishment. I mean, if you think back to like hunter-gatherer societies, to be exiled is basically a death sentence, because you're probably not going to survive well and long on your own. And in ancient Rome or Greece, to be exiled to a barren island, your survival ability goes way down, and just to be without the company of other people and the people who might bring meaning to your life, and maybe the implicit sense of shame that comes with that, all of it begins to seem as if, well, how could life be worth living under those conditions? But maybe it's rational to end your life, or maybe it's not, right? And you can think of people who've endured prison and enslavement and all sorts of awful situations, and with the benefit of a Stoic mindset, have been able to actually flourish, and or certainly flourish mentally, emotionally, if not in the sense of materially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not relying on those externals, maybe not relying on nation or validation from others. And some of the other Metallica songs you talk about show us some of the dangers that can be associated with war. That maybe one thought that they were in some noble pursuit, but it turned out to be really terrible in the end. There was maybe that self-deception, or they were sucked into joining a cause that they thought was good, but turned out not to be. It's the madness of crowds that can be a terrible thing the Stoics warn us about.
Yeah, well, so war, right, is historically just one of the leading causes of death, or at least one of the most unfortunate causes of death of young people, young men in particular. And the song that I referenced before, One, is inspired by that movie Johnny Got His Gun, which is depicted in the context of World War I, which itself was a controversial war. But yet you have young men flocking to join up and fight, and it was filmed and aired at a time when the Vietnam War was raging, and likewise an unpopular war in historical perspective. And plenty of other Metallica songs engage this topic as well, from For Whom the Bell Tolls on Ride the Lightning, which is inspired by the Ernest Hemingway novel, and calling into question, is this war really worthwhile? Is this hill that we're on worth dying for? And it's that song is at least somewhat ambiguous as to how one might answer it. Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. But again, on Master of Puppets, we have the song that really comes out as anti-war, Disposable Heroes, where the young men who are led into glory seeking in joining the military and fighting for the glory of country come to realize that they're really just being the narrator of the song in particular comes to realize that he's just being manipulated and used as cannon fodder, or whatever the more modern military equivalent of that might be. It doesn't matter at all as an individual person to the commanders who are sending him to die.
Yep, so definitely questioning common wisdom, definitely thinking about what we're getting into before we do it, making such a major life decision. As many of these young men, maybe they're 17, 18, and they just get thrown into this, although of their own choosing to some extent.
Yeah, and that you mentioned 17 or 18, right? In the song Disposable Heroes, the line goes, 21 only son, which 21 is a bit older than 17 and 18, and far less impressionable, but it works as a rhyme in the song. The military does like to get them young, 17, 18. You're much more open to military indoctrination, military mindset, being taken apart and put back together. And yeah, I mean, this is not to say that no one should serve in the military. Obviously, that's not the case. And there are lots of great Stoic values that are taught in the military. But you really do need to be careful.
Yep. All right. To move on to another topic, although related, you talk about the acceptance of death in your book. The lyric, or as you write, when Reaper calls, may it be that we walk straight and right.
Yeah, so that's off of a more recent song from the album Hardwired to Self-Destruct, and it's part of a song that's somewhat satirizing the romance of death and the sort of Romeo and Juliet kind of we can be together in eternity sort of mindset. But there is an element of seriousness to that line as well, where we do know that at a certain point death is inevitable. And, there's the great poetic line, right, of to rage against the dying of the light. And surely that is the way to go. At a certain point in one's struggle, whether it be with an illness or whatever the case may be. But when the inevitability sets in, at least I hope that I am accepting on my deathbed the way that line sort of speaks to.
Yes, not hopefully having regrets of, oh, I didn't live a fulfilled life. I missed this, I missed that, as the Stoics warn us of that the end of life is approaching. We might underestimate that. But how many people later in life find out that they missed their opportunity to find fulfillment?
Sort of possibility that you end up on your deathbed with regrets and unfulfilled plans and wishes and all of that kind of thing, right? I mean, the cliche is that nobody ever says, I wish that I had spent more time at work or on social media or something like that when they're on their deathbed, right? It tends to be more about the way in which, they should have spent more time with friends and family and pursuits that they found meaningful and all of that kind of thing. So it certainly is a spur to choose wisely how one lives in the present.
Yes, and having that acceptance, as some people can be fearful about death their entire life. And I imagine that most people will feel that little existential pang once in a while, but to be in such a state of, oh, this is terrible, and maybe even not even value the life that they have now. Well, okay, death might be the end of it, but what about what comes before that?
The idea that that fear of death can deprive a life of its joy and zest and value. I mean, I think in particular there of Epicurus, not a Stoic, but certainly someone the Stoics can borrow from, right, with his views on the fear of death and believing that death brings the end, that there is nothing after, that should liberate us from the kinds of fears that tend to take away from the enjoyment of a life, including the fear of death itself.
Yes, and still living a good life while we can, as the Stoics, of course, focus on value and virtues. And it's not like, oh, well, hey, there's no afterlife, so I can just do whatever I want. Who cares? We're still to treat people with respect and dignity and live a virtuous life. That's one criticism that might assail the Stoics, of course.
Yeah, and you mentioned virtues, right? I mean, I forget the contrasting terms that I've heard.
Oh, vice.
I'm sorry. No, not of vices, but they talk about eulogy virtues, right? I mean, what would you like people to say about you when you're gone, right? And it tends not to be whatever the opposite would be, right? That he was whatever, the hardest worker at the job, or the richest guy, or whatever. It tends to be, when you think about what would you want people to really say about you, right? That you were a loving family member, a good and devoted friend, that you were kind, that you were generous, those kind of things. That's the stuff that's really important.
Oh, I'm seeing a differentiation between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. That maybe on the resume, it's like, oh, I'm a punctual person, I'm a hard worker, I'm a team, all these like buzzwords that people want to put on applications, right?
That's exactly it.
I'm seeing here kindness, compassion, love, humility, wisdom, courage, integrity are under this banner of eulogy virtues, as I suppose a philosopher here, David Brooks.
All right. Very good. Yes. That's what I was thinking of.
The moral bucket list. I'm seeing this is some live Googling during the podcast.
All right. Well,
that's
thanks
fine.
for
That's interesting.
That. Yeah.
Okay. To move on to another song you write about, Wherever I May Roam, there's this lyric, by myself, but not alone.
Yeah. And when you asked me to come on the podcast with this book, that was a song in particular that I thought of as fitting with Stoicism, and that's a neat, paradoxical, poetic line, right? Some people look askance when I say that I'm writing a book about the lyrics of Metallica, right? People are ready to hear about Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen and people like that, but there's a good bit of poetry as well as wisdom and insight embedded in the lyrics of Metallica, and that song, Wherever I May Roam, although it was a radio hit off of their biggest self-titled album, the Black Album, Metallica, has some gems in there, right? And so, by myself but not alone, that's a bit of a head scratcher in terms of how you make sense of that. But one interpretation of it, and I think this fits a bit with Stoicism, is that being alone, right? We talked about exile before. Being alone is not necessarily a bad thing, right? You can be alone and certainly not be lonely. And that doesn't even necessarily mean that you're living like a hermit, cut off from other people, or a person who's forced into exile, but instead that you're someone who relies on himself or herself primarily for the pleasure and the value that they take in life, right? And so the song "Wherever I May Roam" is basically about a person who's cutting ties with the life that he's lived in the past, and heading out on the road and self-defining and being it's a kind of a rugged individualism without making too much of that. Sure, other people are valuable and important, and there is certainly a place for friendship, an important place for friendship in the good life and in the Stoic life. But we're really someone who is more valuable when we're not needy and codependent upon other people.
Yes, and the Stoics, I believe Seneca also mentioned this idea of wherever you go, there you are. That some people will say, oh, well, if I change my environment, things are going to get a lot better, things are going to change. But what if you have a bad mindset? What if it's not everybody else, it's you, right? So there's that idea too.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We tend to want to look at externals as the cause of our unhappiness or whatever the case may be, but wherever you go, you take yourself with you, right? You can be. That reminds me of the sort of the flip side of that is the line from Milton's Paradise Lost, right, where Satan reasons that he can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven, right? And so even the worst circumstances, even a hell can be made into a heaven. I mean, it doesn't work out that well for Satan in Paradise Lost ultimately, but the sentiment is worth noting.
Yes, and the Stoics also thought of this idea of a cosmopolis, that we're all part of a society, we're part of this world, so there's an interconnectedness of things on many different levels, whether it's just interactions with others, whether it's a biological or molecular thing. Certainly they weren't talking about molecules, but they seem to be onto something with their idea of everything being connected in some way.
Yeah, connectedness and sort of being a citizen of the world. There's a lot to be said for that.
Yes, the Socrates as well was like not a person of just a small place, but oh, well, I'm someone of the world, and the Stoics spoke of that as well. All right, and to move on to another topic here, you write of a difference of being dependent and fragile versus being independent and firm.
There's the problem that comes when you're too dependent on other people for adulation, approval, and of course we all have had the experience of being burned by others, right? And Epictetus speaks a good bit about dealing with insults. That's some of my favorite sort of black belt level Stoic practice and wisdom there, where but there is the potential temptation of going too far in the other direction and thinking I don't need anyone, and the potential problem of getting yourself in the situation where you end up emotionally isolated, and then when you do reach out to and try to connect with another person, perhaps you're not a full person, but someone who's seeking his other half or her other half, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, there's a balance that we can find value in others. You mentioned friendship earlier, and the Stoics were big on that, and having someone to share your thoughts with, to be open with, and someone who would also provide guidance rather than just being around like yes people and oh, slay queen slay, and just go and do whatever you want. But other people say like, oh, maybe you could check yourself there on that thing, or maybe here's some improvement that you could do, or pointing out flaws in others, pointing out some room for improvement, right?
Yeah, that's right. And this is one of the areas where Hetfield is he's very self-reflective and very vulnerable in ways that someone who hasn't paid close attention to Metallica's lyrics might not notice. But this is one of the places, a song called King Nothing in particular, where he talks about the way in which, he doesn't name himself as the narrator, but it's pretty thinly veiled self-reflection, the way in which other people are kept at a distance from him. All comes down and you wear your crown and you point your finger and there's no one around. Where's your crown, King Nothing? It's sort of a take on the King Midas story, where everything you touch turns to gold, or in his case, gold records, right? And the result is that you can't touch anyone, and everybody's sort of either totally in awe of you or afraid of you, and there's no genuine emotional connection to be had, right? And so you talk about resume virtues, or whatever big long rock star obituary virtues of being whatever, however many platinum or gold records and albums sold, and this and that. But if there's no one who can really tell you that there's something wrong with you when there's something wrong with you, what do you have, and what kind of a life is that? It's the life of King Nothing, as the song says.
Yeah, that many will want to boast and put on this image that, oh, they're the best. They've had all these accolades and awards, and oh, look at me. Like some of the extreme examples here, like the pickup artists on YouTube. It's like, oh, women love me. I've been with thousands of women, and I can teach you how to pick up women. Pay me $1,000 an hour. It just seems like a very King Nothing thing to me, because many of these individuals have gotten into legal issues. They've had certain diseases, and it's like, is this really the life we want to live? We're going to put so much into adulation from others, this emotional affection, and maybe even not emotional at one part. Like, if you're just going to be with someone and dispose of them and move on with life, like, do you really have a great connection there? So that could be one of these King Nothings out there. It's like questioning the value of things is a common theme in the Stoic texts, that maybe it can be, oh, well, look, I have this money, or I was born to this certain family, and people think this is like the be all end all, or whatever it might be. So trying to find genuine meaning and not just, oh, well, look at me and my crew go around Vegas and we've hooked up with women and like we're the big winners here. Like, maybe not.
Right. Right. I'm thinking as you described that, it's probably Epictetus, since he's the Stoic I'm most familiar with and know best, talking about a horse, right, and bragging about the beauty of your horse as if it's your own beauty, right? Say about the horse that the horse is beautiful, not that, I mean, that doesn't, a beautiful horse doesn't impress people the way that maybe your pickup artistry does, or your gold records do, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it's kind of hollow, which is not to say that, people don't have fun with it at a certain point along the way. But is that really what you want? Is that one of those eulogy virtues? Probably not.
Right. The excess again is the issue with this one that I find. Whereas I heard a conversation with one of these pickup artists and another person, and he was saying like, hey, I'm just not interested in that. And like, oh, what do you mean you're not interested in that? Like, I'd just rather be by myself and not have all of these encounters with women. Like, I just don't want that. And he was just astounded that was the response. So he's like, hey, King Nothing over there, that crown means nothing to me.
Yeah.
as Epictetus will do that. Like, he'll joke around in these conversations, like calling people slaves or slavish, and like, oh, this really doesn't matter. You've propped this up to be so much, but it doesn't have much value in my eyes.
Right. It's funny how you can deflate people that way. I remember going car shopping years and years ago, and the guy trying to upsell me on whatever the better model was. I'm just not a car guy. This will be blasphemy to some people, but I said to him, well, a car is a car is a car, right? And his jaw just, hit the ground. How could I say something like that, right? But a car is four wheels and transportation for me. If you were going to give me, a free car or a free Porsche or something like that, sure, I'll take the better one, but I'm not paying for it.
Yeah, something good, something functional. As we've talked about in a previous episode, the Stoic idea that under a thatched roof lies slavery.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so that can be, too much want of the externals can be ruinous. So you got these people out there in 6-figure jobs, and they're still paycheck to paycheck, and they want, and they just can't be satisfied. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case.
Yeah, the Stoics certainly warn of that. And I remember Epictetus also, you talk of the King Nothing ideas, that some of his students would say, oh, I'm the best with bodybuilding. Like, I have these weights, and look at the weights that I have, and they'll talk about their exercise routine. And Epictetus is saying, no, put away your jumping weights. Like, let us see your physique. Let us see how you exercise. Whereas people are talking about they do this and that, but they're not necessarily providing receipts, and it doesn't seem to match up. People might boast, but they're not actually doing the things they're saying they're doing.
Yeah, and even if they're doing it, like, we'll take that pickup artist at his word. Is he really enjoying it as much as he wants you to think he is? It could be a case of you protest too much, right?
All right, and to wrap it up here, you talk of the want of fame. That can be a bad thing. That's similar to that King of Nothing concept, that maybe people place too much in the approval of others, and this can be a very dangerous thing.
Well, that's right. I mean, King Nothing really does speak primarily to the issue of fame, right? In the way in which when you have all the gold records on the wall, and you've gotten them by insisting that things be done your way, but the golden touch keeps everybody away from you. And I mean, fame is just One of the hardest temptations I think anybody can want to deal with. It's easy to feel self-righteous in, for example, saying, "Well, the money doesn't matter, this doesn't matter, that doesn't matter," but it's our own vanity that, in some ways, is the last temptation to be overcome, and to not be seeking adulation and not be seeking flattery, but just doing what we do for the sake of it. I think this is where a lot of comedians go wrong. That they're doing what they're doing for the sake of the approval and the flattery and the laughter. You get a sense pretty quickly when there's a sense of generosity and givingness behind a comedian. They really want to make you laugh more than they want to be thought clever or funny, that kind of thing. And so I imagine that's the same with any kind of performer. And I know it's a temptation for me as a sort of kind of performer, as a teacher, that I should be teaching for the sake of trying to give to the students rather than have the student admire me or think I'm smart or think I'm clever or something like that. So that's a tough one. And I think the more successful you are, as you are if you are James Hetfield of Metallica, the more difficult that hurdle becomes to clear.
Yes, and it's okay to have some validation from others and desire relationships or friendships to some extent, but just not too much. And that, okay, well, hey, you're a musician or you're an author, and then someone's like, oh, I didn't like your book or whatever, and then it's like, oh, I'm terrible, I failed because I have a critic, right? It's just like not reasonable to think that everyone will like you. And in some cases, if everyone does like you, then maybe you're just doing something wrong because you've sold out.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, listen, I think we all know that the negative feels a lot worse than the positive feels good when it comes to acclaim, compliments, and criticisms, that sort of thing. If everybody likes what you do, and if everybody likes you, well, maybe you're not really being genuine, not really being authentic, which isn't to say that we should go around cultivating people who don't like us either, but it's a sign that you're probably doing something right. If not everybody likes it, not everybody approves of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I like with metal music, because a lot of it is just different than what you're going to hear on mainstream radio, where mainstream radio music can seem very formulaic and is like anything new here, and some artists are just like auto-tuning and they're not really themselves the songwriters, and it's like, is it so genuine? I don't know, maybe it's some snobbishness in my case, maybe not, but you could see that and question it. And I know one metal group, Man of War, they have a song called All Men Play on 10, making fun of bands that sell out and they're not heavy anymore, they're just tuning down their guitars, and it's not as good music, and they're saying, no, we're never going to turn down again.
Yeah.
we're not going to like shave our hair, we're not going to go like the image that the producer wants, we're just going to do our own thing, we're going to have an element of freedom and just be ourselves rather than just compromising our values in order to make money.
Yeah, and of course that's one of the areas where Metallica has lost fans and gained fans over the year, right? Their claim on Master of Puppets in the song Damage Incorporated was that honesty is my only excuse, and they're going to go against the grain until the end, which they really were doing at that time. But they did court mainstream success and did make commercial sounding music at various points in time. And they did get their fair share, maybe more than their fair share, of criticism for it. And this sort of takes us to an album that I particularly like and regard highly, Death Magnetic, which I see as their great comeback album. And on that album is the song Broken, Beaten, Scarred, which I take as a sort of response to another song on the album, The Judas Kiss, where there is an admission from Hetfield as the lyricist that he did feel hurt, did feel betrayed by some of the criticism and some of the selfish-ridden dead goodbyes, as the lyric says, where people just sort of kissed him off as a has-been and whatnot. But Broken, Beaten, Scarred has a real vulnerability to it. It talks about rising again after falling, and of showing your scars, of displaying them, not as some sort of necessarily macho display of toughness, but as a display that we all bleed, we all are hurt. None of us have impenetrable stoic armor. And we can all sort of rise again from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that are hurled at us. And there's a great theme of resilience there, and really a theme of anti-fragility, as Nassim Taleb calls it, right? Of actually improving, and this is a Stoic kind of thing, right? Improving under shocks and improving under injuries. And he actually has a paraphrase of the old Nietzsche line in there about what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And that certainly is, if not 100% correct, because, it might not necessarily make you stronger, but it can, right? And this is really, I think, a Stoic insight.
Yeah, there's the idea that there's going to be turbulence in life, and it's not always going to be a dance or a picnic, as the Stoics, right? There are going to be the vicissitudes, right? There's going to be the tumultuous times. So let's think about how we can prepare for that and get through it and be resilient and keep that strong mindset, have gratitude for the things that are going well, and of course be happy when we have prevailed and recognize when we did a better job with that. I don't know, maybe we're much younger and we're not as prepared, we haven't had much experience, but over time it's like, oh, well, now, when I first started driving, that person cut me off and I was really mad, but now I see people doing that and I laugh and say, oh, what a silly person. Why do they have to be so aggressive on the road, right? There's just a lot of ways to try to get past these things. Maybe it takes time. Maybe there's always going to be a little bit of a tinge of anger or some kind of negative emotion, but we can work to try to get past that.
Yeah, it takes practice, right? And there's a space between stimulus and response, and with time and practice, the space becomes a little longer, and we become a little bit better at choosing our reaction to it.
Yes, and being genuine and recognizing the mistakes that we made, the areas for improvement, rather than blaming someone else, cursing at people. Like I was thinking it was an internet meltdown that happened around December of 2021. This guy, Jack Murphy, went on someone's show, an article at a viewer asked a question as a super chat on YouTube, and he's just like screaming F you to the host. And it's just like, well, the host really had nothing to do with it. And after there was criticism of him, he's like, oh, it was all the critics, and he wasn't really taking accountability for anything that went on, especially when people dug up his past and found a lot of things that weren't consistent with the image that he was putting out there. It wasn't like a naming of the things he did, the mistakes he made. It was all like, oh, blame everyone else is terrible. It's like not the way to go. He's asking for forgiveness, but there's no like genuine apology. So yeah, admitting one's fault, looking for improvement, and being genuine.
Yeah, and of course that's where genuine and true friends come into play as well, who can really, help you to look at yourself.
Yeah, you certainly don't want that friend who's like, oh, I'm only like that when I'm drinking, but then it's happening like every week, and it's like, well, I don't know, is that your real self? Or like, what is that? Like, people will just make those glib excuses, but when the behavior happens again and again, it's like, oh, maybe we should reevaluate our surroundings and cut some people off in time. The Stoics definitely encourage us to choose our friends carefully and to use our time carefully as well, as those are related.
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, you really can be the architect of your own environment in that way. I mean, not fully, right? There are some people and situations that are inevitable and that are not of your own choosing, but you can choose lots of the people, places, and things in your life, and do so wisely in a way that's going to be conducive to your peace of mind, serenity, and all those other good things.
Yes, and to not sell out is the big thing. I think Seneca jokes about it is that if you must sell out, don't do so cheaply. But definitely don't want to compromise your values in the pursuit of other things. I mean, there may be concessions that we make day to day, but hopefully not major ones. Like, for instance, in the workplace, maybe we'll have to just be a little bit quieter, wear a suit. Like, okay, maybe that's reasonable, but we don't want to go too much in one direction of compromising ourselves and, say, agreeing to contracts that we find unconscionable. If we find corruption in the workplace, then maybe we should consider leaving that and not being part of a corrupt system, even if we've tried to change it or not.
Right, right. I like that line. If you're going to sell out, don't do it cheaply.
Yeah. It was the Man of War song here. All men play on 10. The lyricist writes, "I made a rock and roll sin when I tried giving in to make money, had to turn down low. They said, why be proud? Don't play so loud. Be like us and get a sound that's real thin. Wear a polyester suit, act happy, look cute, get a haircut, and buy small gear." That's when I turned to them and said, hold it right there.
Right.
And, about an hour here. Can you let listeners know where to find your book and how to reach out to you?
All right, great. Well, I never tell anybody where they should get the book, but you know where books are found. There are all kinds of online retailers and bookstores and that kind of thing. Figure that out for yourself. But I would love to hear from you, whether you've been listening to this podcast or you've read the book in particular. And you can get me at my email address, which is just my name, William Irwin, IRWIN, at kings.edu. I'm also on Twitter. I don't do Twitter battles or anything like that, but I'm open to DMs. So you heard this podcast or read the book and you have thoughts, and I'm glad to hear from you about criticisms too. As I say in the book, a good book should be a conversation starter and not a conversation ender. So you heard something in this podcast, or you read something in the book that you disagree with, or that you think I left out or didn't understand or forgot, hit me up with that too. I love to hear stuff that you approve of and agreed with, but we've just been talking about dealing with criticism, and I will be glad to have critical discussion as well. So hit me up through Twitter or through my email address, and be good to continue the conversation. And thanks again, Justin, for having me.
Yes, and the title of the book, The Meaning of Metallica, Ride the Lyrics, and that's William Irwin, IRWIN. And you have your kings.edu page, right?
Yeah, so I've got a web page with all kinds of links to stuff. If you just Google my name, William Irwin, and I'm at King's College in Pennsylvania, you'll find my web page on the college website as well.
And any upcoming books or projects that listeners can look forward to?
Well, so I'm the series editor for the Blackwell Philosophy and Pop Culture series, and that's an ongoing project, right? So we have a recent book on the sci-fi franchise, The Expanse and philosophy. We have a recent book on Black Panther and philosophy, and we have forthcoming books on Ted Lasso and philosophy, and a new Star Wars and philosophy book, and a Dune and philosophy book. So all kinds of stuff in the pipeline there.
All right. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more content. See the show notes for more information and links surrounding topics discussed in this episode. Support my efforts through my Patreon page found at stoicsolutionspodcast.com. Access special perks, including having upcoming podcast guests answer your questions, custom-made podcast episodes, and private one-on-one calls to discuss whatever you'd like. Visit my other podcast at hurdygurdytravel.com, that's HURDYGURDY travel.com, to learn how to make money, save money, and travel the world at next to no cost with credit card rewards, deals, and loyalty programs. Use affiliate or referral links to support me at no extra cost to you. Thanks to generous patrons and fans of this podcast who help support my work. Have a great day.